What Queen Camilla just realised behind closed doors is that a secret political coup can be permanently dismantled by the simple rearrangement of a single piece of furniture. In less than 24 hours, what was meticulously orchestrated to be her ultimate elevation into a shadow, Regent became the most suffocating institutional reprimand she has ever faced. The realization was immediate and freezing as she stepped into the highly restricted Privy Council briefing room at Buckingham Palace, fully expecting to take her seat at the head of the table to dictate the King's political schedule for the upcoming quarter. She expected the senior government ministers and private secretaries to bow to her newly established authority as the ultimate gatekeeper of the state. Instead, she looked toward the apex of the room and saw a glaring, undeniable physical void. The sovereign's chair. The seat she had planned to occupy had been entirely removed from her side of the room. Sitting firmly at the opposite head of the table, flanked by the highest-ranking constitutional advisors of the British government and holding the master copy of the National Diary, was Prince William. Despite the crown on her head, she was just brutally reminded that the political machinery of the state answers exclusively to the bloodline. This is the story of a cold constitutional purge executed with terrifying administrative precision and weaponized restraint. Today we are going to unpack the quiet systemic counteroffensive launched by the Prince of Wales to neutralize Camilla's audacious attempt to hijack the executive functions of the King. We will examine the secret administrative directive she attempted to push through the Cabinet Office to make herself a co-regent in all but name. How William uncovered this staggering exploitation of the sovereign's vulnerability and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. Most importantly, we will analyse the chilling psychological climax that left the Queen Consort completely politically isolated in a room full of state officials, realising that her 30-year campaign to conquer the institution has just been permanently blocked by the unyielding architecture of constitutional law. To understand the absolute devastation of this exact moment, we have to rebuild the staggering illusion of absolute power Camilla had constructed for herself. For 30 years, she played the longest, most patient, and most calculating game in modern royal history. She survived the intense public fury of the 1990s, methodically outlasted the hostility of the old aristocratic guard, and watched the total institutional erasure of Princess Diana's legacy within the palace walls. She slowly and carefully replaced the ghosts of the past with her own loyal courtiers, her own favoured press contacts, and her own private secretaries. By the time the crown was placed on her head at Westminster Abbey, the transition felt entirely complete. She believed she had King Charles completely controlled and that the institution had finally totally surrendered to her will. In her mind, she had successfully transformed from the realm's most hated mistress into its untouchable matriarch. The magnificent royal residences felt like her personal properties, and the sovereign's executive authority felt like her ultimate impenetrable shield. This is the profound danger of surviving a long, bitter war of attrition. You begin to mistake sheer endurance for absolute boundless political authority. Camilla began to operate under the dangerous assumption that the entire machinery of the British government was now permanently structured around her comfort, her post-reign survival, and her commands. She expected the core blood royals to quietly step aside, assuming they were either too exhausted or too afraid of upsetting the ailing king to challenge her quiet administrative maneuvers behind the scenes. But an illusion of power is highly vulnerable to the cold, hard reality of institutional ownership and legal leverage. The trigger for this current crisis began months ago, hidden far beneath the surface of the intense preparations for the king's adjusted workload. As Charles's medical treatments necessitated a reduction in his public-facing duties, a massive power vacuum opened within the palace. In the aristocratic world, the National Diary is not merely a calendar, it is the absolute steering wheel of the geopolitical state. Whoever controls the schedule controls who the king meets, what intelligence he receives, and what political narratives the monarchy endorses. Camilla recognized a stark, uncomfortable reality. Her constitutional authority as Queen Consort is entirely dependent on her husband's ability to govern, and it vanishes overnight the moment his reign ends. Driven by deep-seated institutional desperation and the terrifying prospect of losing her grip on the state, her office quietly initiated a highly sophisticated, unprecedented maneuver. Behind the velvet ropes, her private secretaries drafted a sweeping administrative proposal known internally as the Co-Regency Directive. Citing the need for seamless continuity and the protection of the king's health, the paperwork was designed to formally reroute all executive scheduling, prime ministerial audiences and foreign diplomatic meetings through the Queen Consort's private office before they ever reached the king. It was a calculated, quiet attempt to absorb the actual geopolitical power of the British state. Camilla was attempting to insert herself as the ultimate unavoidable bottleneck of the government. She wanted to transition from being a ceremonial companion to becoming the operational architect of the monarchy, ensuring that her political leverage would become so deeply embedded in the government, machinery that she would remain untouchable long after the crown passed to the next generation. She assumed that by framing this unprecedented overreach as a devoted wife simply managing her husband's stressful workload, the Cabinet Office would quietly rubber stamp the new protocols without daring to cause an administrative scene. But she profoundly underestimated Prince William and the unforgiving machinery of the British Constitution. This is where the story shifts from a tale of blind ambition to a forensic, cold-blooded institutional discovery. William is no longer just an heir waiting in the wings. As the Prince of Wales, the Duke of Cornwall, and a constitutionally appointed Councillor of State, he is the active legal regulator of the institution's continuity. He approaches the architecture of the monarchy with the cold, data-driven discipline of a modern monarch in waiting. Furthermore, he views the crown not as a family business to be manipulated by a spouse, but as a billion-dollar geopolitical corporation that requires absolute structural integrity when the internal audits of the proposed scheduling protocols cross the automated systems of the Central Royal Secretariat. The paper trail immediately unraveled. William recognized the maneuver not as a harmless desire to assist an ailing husband, but as a staggering exploitation of the sovereign's vulnerability. It was a direct attempt by an unelected, non-blood royal to intercept the executive functions of the state. The blood royals did not launch a dramatic family confrontation. William did not scream at Camilla in the grand hallways of the palace or leak angry tirades to the tabloid press. The core royals operate with a devastatingly analytical and emotionally intelligent restraint. Instead, William went directly to the master legal architecture of the state. He realized that the greatest weakness of Camilla's strategy is that she possesses absolutely no inherent sovereign authority. Every ounce of her power is borrowed, and under strict British law, a Queen Consort has absolutely no legal right to mandate the government's interactions with the monarch. Utilizing his absolute legal leverage and newly activated provisions surrounding the transition of power, William engineered a brilliant silent execution of revenge. He completely bypassed the King's office and the Queen Consort staff. William took Camilla's scheduling directive directly to the highest levels of the Privy Council and the Cabinet Office. With a single silent administrative stroke, he legally and permanently vetoed the Queen Consort's order. But the retaliation did not stop at simply voiding a piece of paper. To truly neutralize the illusion of her power and secure the continuity of the state, William initiated a total forensic blockade. He quietly signed a sweeping constitutional directive that permanently transferred the oversight of the National Diary away from the King's personal staff and directly into the hands of his own office. The legal loophole Camilla had spent months trying to pry open was welded, shut in a single afternoon through the ruthless application of protocol. To ensure the palace ecosystem instantly recognized this transfer of power, William orchestrated a visual humiliation so profound it would shatter Camilla's authority without a single raised voice. He instructed the master of the household to permanently alter the seating arrangements for all high-level government briefings, stripping the Queen Consort of her presumed place at the head of the table. Which brings us back to that freezing moment in the Privy Council briefing room. Camilla, confident that her shadow regency was secured and her political future guaranteed, stepped into the room expecting absolute deference. Instead, she found herself physically and administratively displaced. As she stared at the glaring physical void where her chair should have been, and looked down the long mahogany table to see Prince William calmly running the meeting with the highest officials of the land, the trap snapped completely shut. In front of the most powerful political figures in the British government, Camilla realized that William had just used the rigid architecture of the state to publicly amputate her political ambitions. She had spent 30 years trying to conquer the family, but she had just crashed headfirst into the unbreakable wall of the Constitution. Cornered, humiliated, and watching her manufactured legacy evaporate before her eyes, she realized that she was standing in a political arena she does not control. completely locked out of the true machinery of the state by a stepson who held every single legal card. As the heavy mahogany doors of the Privy Council briefing room quietly closed behind her, the profound humiliation of the moment settled over the Queen Consort. She stood in the corridor, completely exiled from the political heartbeat of the British state. The visual absence of her chair at the head of the table was not a logistical error or a temporary oversight. It was a loud, undeniable broadcast of her constitutional irrelevance, retreating to the private royal apartments immediately after the briefing concluded. Camilla demanded an audience with King Charles. She expected outrage. She expected the man who had torn the British establishment apart to legitimise her too, instantly summon the Prince of Wales and demand her place at the executive table be restored. She wanted Charles to assert his sovereign will over his son and protect his wife's political pride, but as she delivered her frantic ultimatum, she was met with a devastating heavy silence. The king simply looked away, adjusting his cuffs, and offered a quietly profound refusal. He did exactly nothing. This unanswered plea did not represent a minor marital disagreement over a meeting schedule. It signified a permanent seismic shift in the gravitational centre of the monarchy. Charles recognised the unyielding trap his heir had set. Prince William had executed the blockade under the strict legal auspices of the newly activated transition protocols, leveraging unassailable state law. To overturn William's directive would mean the king manually forcing his wife into classified government briefings, triggering an unsustainable political scandal during a highly sensitive period for the crown. Charles made a cold, sovereign calculation. The institutional survival of the monarchy and his own historical legacy were worth infinitely more than the political ambitions of his wife. In that freezing, unspoken moment, the king chose the integrity of the state over Camilla. That deafening silence forced the Queen Consort to confront a freezing reality she had successfully ignored since the coronation. To fully comprehend the absolute devastation of this trap, one must unpack the commercial and structural desperation that dictates Camilla's entire existence behind the scenes. Why did she care so deeply about managing the king's political diary? Because behind the glittering public relations facade lies a stark, broke reality. Legally, structurally, and financially, the Queen Consort owns absolutely nothing within the royal infrastructure. She does not own the palaces, she commands no sovereign wealth, and she possesses no independent constitutional authority that survives past her husband's current reign. Every ounce of her geopolitical weight is entirely borrowed. The secret Co-Regency Directive was her desperate attempt to manufacture actual, untouchable political leverage that would survive the end of Charles's rule. She was frantically trying to weave herself so deeply into the government machinery that she could never be marginalized. Hoping to secure a permanent seat at the table of global power, by invoking the rigid architecture of the Constitution, Prince William effectively starved these political ambitions of their institutional oxygen. This frantic scrambling stands in devastating contrast to the quiet, undeniable ascension of Princess Catherine. While Camilla desperately manipulated administrative channels to artificially elevate herself into a shadow regent, Catherine operates with the supreme confidence of absolute inevitability. The Princess of Wales does not need to broker backroom deals or hijack the prime. Ministers audiences to secure her future because she is the future of the state itself. Despite enduring immense personal and health trials over the past year, Catherine has never demanded political concessions or attempted to absorb the sovereign's executive duties. She rests securely in her role, embodying the exact uncomplaining sacrifice and institutional dignity that the crown demands. William has ensured that the protective dome over the true bloodline is completely impenetrable, leaving the frantic maneuvering of the Queen Consort entirely suffocated by protocol. The courtiers, the cabinet ministers, and the palace staff see these subtle protocol changes instantly. In the aristocratic world, a bypassed scheduling directive and a removed chair in the Privy Council are never mere logistical accidents. They are forensic proof regarding the massive transfer of true power. The servants who once rushed to accommodate the Queen Consort's every preference are now actively reading the room. They see the master of the household enforcing Prince William's blockade right in front of her face. The staff are looking past the current fading reign and quietly permanently aligning their absolute loyalties with the Prince of Wales. The execution of this constitutional purge was in reality a structural rehearsal for Camilla's eventual obsolescence. The system allowed her to wear the crown, but the moment she attempted to touch the actual steering wheel of the state, she was completely isolated. She has definitively, permanently lost the kingdom. Prince William used the cold, unforgiving protocol of the government to protect the state from a woman who wanted to use the crown for her own ego. When the reign eventually changes, the grand illusion will finally dissolve. Camilla will be relegated to the margins of history, sitting in a magnificent but empty room, holding a title that carries absolutely no geopolitical weight, waiting for intelligence briefings and political meetings that will never come. She will be left with the freezing reality of institutional survival, learning the hardest lesson of the British monarchy: the house always wins. Thank you for exploring this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics of the royal institution with us. If you appreciate this level of forensic emotional analysis and storytelling, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know how you feel about Prince William stepping up to protect the executive functions of the crown. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next chapter.